Hello and welcome to the 8th and final season of my unhinged recap of Desperate Housewives. I cannot believe this is it. I'm sure at the end I will be overcome with emotion and get into some things, but I'm going to try and save that for the end. Chances are you're making your way through this whole series of videos and you don't really want to stop to yap when there's a fucking murder. So let's just get into it. Who cares? Season 8, Episode 1. We pick up right where we left off with Season 7, at the conclusion of the progressive dinner party on Wisteria Lane. The girls and Carlos load up Alejandro's body in the car, drive it out to the woods, and bury him. However, just as they're starting to cover him up with dirt, his cell phone rings. Susan picks it up and sees that it is home calling. She points out this means he has a family or something, and somebody is definitely going to notice that he's missing. Lynette and Susan are both kind of freaking out. They're insisting that it's not too late to go to the police and claim self-defense, but now that they've already went through a dinner party pretending there was no dead body and tried to bury the body, it's clearly a cover-up. They're gonna get caught. Bree tells the girls, that's enough. This was a very bad man. He hurt our friend, her husband protected her, and now we are going to protect them. And then the Mary Alice voiceover tells us that this whole mess may be more complicated than we bargained for. Okay, so few little things right off the bat. One, I think it's fascinating that Lynette is freaking out just as much as Susan is. In a lot of ways, we see Lynette as the competent one, and then Susan as the opposite of that spectrum. But this is completely out of Lynette's control, and so of course she is feeling uncertain. Also, there is a dead man, that complicates things. And second, I feel like some showrunners / networks in the modern age would end the season 2 episodes earlier, season 7, and just done the dinner party, and then there's a dead body they're trying to cover up, so then half of season 8 is spent with the audience not knowing who it is. What is different about Desperate Housewives is the core cast of characters don't know the solutions to the mysteries, and they learn along with the audience. So if the women all knew, but we did not, it would feel really cheap and really disconnected. Somebody has to know what's going on. And that's the way that the mystery and intrigue really operated in season 1. If we think back to even the pilot, Mary Alice knows what happened in her past all along, but all of the other women do not. And so that's where the secrets come from. And now in season 8, Mary Alice is warning us of what's to come ahead, and all of the other women don't know what's about to come. The intrigue lies in the future as opposed to the past. It allows us to stay a little more focused on the core cast of characters in the mystery, quote-unquote, element of this season. We don't need any outsiders with dark secrets, as the series kind of got to a certain point where we didn't even need Mary Alice to tell us that the new neighbor was suspicious. We just knew because they're a new neighbor. Usually they're suspicious anyway. I will also say that maybe the reason I love the season 3 episode Bang, the shooting episode, might be because that is where the past and present collide at the highest velocity in the series so far. Carolyn Bigsby's husband being connected to Monique Polier, who is one of the 2 women who is potentially dead in the season 3 mystery, allows that episode to unravel a little more about the people involved in the mystery while still connecting to the present conflicts, which would be Lynette and Nora. So just talking about the past and present got me thinking about certain episodes like that really resonate for me. I think that coming together of past and present is what fuels season 8 so effectively, but a little more on that when we get to the end of the episode. Hang with me. Let's move on to some individual character stories this episode. So in the Solis household, Carlos has been snapping at his kids, and he's really struggling with feeling guilty after what he did. He knows that he did what he had to do to protect his wife, but there's still remorse, and he decides to go talk to a priest about what happened. He does not give a full confession, though. He just says he did something bad, that he would be in trouble with authorities if people found out. The priest suggests that the only way for him to really get absolution in this is to go to the authorities and confess to his crime. Doing so, of course, would completely destroy their family. Gabby steps up to support Carlos as he's struggling with this. She tells him that yes, he took a man's life, but he also saved a life. And, quote, If it's absolution you're looking for, I give it to you. There's a lot of good Gabby stuff this season, but I think this might be my all-time favorite Gabby Carlos scene. When the show actually gives Eva Longoria these really earnest and heartfelt and vulnerable moments, she shines. I know in pop culture, Gabby is kind of known more for funny things she says about fashion and like money and how beautiful she is, but her heart is so crucial to the show and to this season, as I talked about last video. So although this episode does give her some silly things like running around town trying to find a priest for Carlos to confess to, it resulted in this. So it's worth that little bit of bumbling for me. So since the night of the dinner party, Bree has continued to hook up with Chuck. He thinks that Bree's friends don't like him because they've all changed the way that they behave around him since the night of that dinner party, which presumably is when they all like really met him for the first time. But she reassures him that everything is fine. At one point, Chuck tells Bree that they found a body. It is not Alejandro though, this is just a random murder he's working on, but they were able to find the person who did it because the man's car was still around, so it just left a big trail. So Bree and Gabby decide they need to get rid of Alejandro's car. They're almost caught by Chuck and have to tell a few lies to get out of a close call, but they end up getting carjacked, which was the goal. As you may recall, this is also the plan to get rid of the car that killed Juanita Solis in season 1. So Bree only has a few tricks up her sleeve, but that's okay, because the car's gone and that's all that matters. There is a little bit of drama in the Scavo household. Who's surprised? Tom has moved out, but they're trying to keep it low key. So he's literally just living in the little space above Bree's garage / work kitchen, which for some reason I find really funny because of the whole Chuck Berry body cover up thing, whatever. Lynette has a nightmare and she goes running over, knocks on a little door upstairs, and she is crying and Tom comforts her. It's so, the way that she could only find comfort from him in that moment is maybe some of the like most romantic writing that we've seen between the couple, just to be totally honest. So they end up having sex. And then the next morning, they sneak home together before the kids can get up. And Tom tells Lynette if she wants to get back together, they have some serious issues to work out. And Lynette tells him that last night was not about getting back together. She just had a nightmare. And Tom tells her, you know what you do when you're scared, Lynette? You go buy a nightlight. You don't go and have sex with the man you're supposed to be separated from. The kids get up a few minutes later, and Tom tells them there's something they need to talk to them about. Moving van alert. There's a new neighbor. His name is Ben, and he is Australian. Boom. The girls embarrass themselves because they all think he's really hot, and Renee tries to make a move on him, but he turns her down, and it's really humiliating for her. Anyways, welcome to the neighborhood, Ben. Like Carlos, Susan has been feeling guilty and really struggling since the death of Alejandro. She's barely sleeping, she's barely eating, she's not even really talking to Mike about what's going on because of course he does not know what's happened. He thinks that she had some sort of big fight with the girls. I wrote here, Susan has a cool costume. No way. Props to Susan Meyer for gaining some fashion sense. Only took 11 years of her life, I guess. And then Susan goes on a run and she visits the place where they buried Alejandro because, of course, if you have been caught in a murder, okay, I think the thing is, I would just be better knowing how to cover up a murder. I don't know. I have thought about it. Like, what would I do? And I think I would use acid. I would at least not go visit the place where we buried the man, which could potentially draw attention to it. Anyways, she does that. She is starting to do some substitute teaching at school, which is great. But the day that she is covering a class, the pet hamster dies. And so she has to help the kids bury it. And Susan starts sobbing. Gabby has a big annual barbecue in this episode. While at the barbecue, Susan tells the girls that she needs to tell Mike because she can't eat or sleep. Bree tells her no one else can know about this. And Lynette says she's not sure when Bree was elected head of the dead guy committee and appears to not really like that she has just decided she's in charge and is the one to make all these decisions. But I'm sorry, no one else stepped up. No one else stepped up that night except for Bree. But some conversation is fair. Like, I get it. A fight then ensues between the girls and they all end up falling into a pool together. And then they sit around and They're like all sad and they all have, wet hair. And they're really just not sure how they're gonna move on from this. And then at the end of the episode, Bree grabs her mail like the responsible lady she is. Mary Alice has a voiceover line. We may find ourselves right back where we started. And Bree has a note that says, I know what you did. It makes me sick. I'm going to tell. I just got chills again. Remember when I said that season 6 begins to explore how everything is a cycle and things repeat and we can never be free from certain things and threats in our lives? Season 8 is a season that I had not rewatched since I first watched the show when I was like 14. And so when I got to this scene, I can't even describe to you the joy that I felt and how smart this is and how exciting it is, because the stakes are already set for us. Like, the same letter was enough to drive Mary Alice to suicide. And like, talk about a threat for the girls. Season 8, episode 2. We get a whole recap this episode of season 1. It sticks mostly on the Mary Alice mystery. It doesn't go too far into the details, just that she did something bad, she was blackmailed, she got this letter, she killed herself. And the voiceover ends with, I had forgotten that history has a way of repeating itself. Mrs. McCluskey happens to walk outside. Bree asks her if she has seen anyone near her mailbox, and Mrs. McCluskey says no. The letter was hand-delivered. There is no postmark on it, so somebody just dropped this off themselves. The note begins to immediately stress her out, and we are told through another Mary Alice voiceover that Bree is beginning to fear she will have the same fate as Mary Alice. Again, I had no fucking memory of any of this. It was actually really exciting for me to start wondering who sent this fucking note. So Bree takes the note to prison to visit Paul and ask if he knows anything about it. Bree points out that it had to be someone who's familiar with the original note, because obviously it's not a coincidence that the two notes are exactly the same. Paul suggests that maybe it's one of the women because all of them know about the note, but Bree says she hasn't asked them about it yet, and Paul says that she should really do so, because if Mary Alice had shared the note with the girls, things might have ended completely differently for her. So Bree starts by telling Gabby the letter, and Gabby immediately suggests that she should stop seeing Chuck. The logic here really is that if somebody knows what Bree did, and she is continuing to stay close to this detective, and this person wants Bree to get caught, like, she's just gonna be toast. Bree tells Gabby that since what happened with Alejandro, having Chuck around has really made her feel safe. So that's why she wants to keep him around now. And then Chuck is in the shower at Bree's home when Bree gets a call from Paul. He tells her that he's been thinking about the letter a little more, and he tells her that when he confessed to the murder of Martha Hoover, he told the police about the letter because, in case you forgot, his motive for killing Martha Hoover was that Martha Hoover is the one who blackmailed Mary Alice back in season 1 with the original I know what you did letter. He told the police about the letter. One of those cops was Chuck. As this realization settles in for her, she realizes she can't break up with him. Instead of feeling safe, she is now more terrified and trapped than ever. Carlos continues to struggle with his guilt this episode, and this time we see it when Gabby tries to seduce him, but he can't get it up because his mind is just elsewhere. And he tells Gabby that this might just be how things are from now on. He is permanently changed as a man, and nothing will ever go back to the way it was. This episode's Scavo fight is about parenting. Tom refuses to play bad cop, but Lynette tells him that if the kids are splitting their time between their two parents, Tom now has an apartment, that Tom's apartment can't be fun apartment, and then Lynette's apartment is bad cop apartment. That is not going to work, and that's not fair to Lynette. Lynette, refusing to play bad cop anymore, tells Parker, sure, he can go to this crazy party, but then it turns out to actually be like too crazy, so she goes to pick him up. She does a keg stand at one point to prove to these kids that she's not a narc. And then Tom is already there because Parker called him also to have him pick him up. So they have this other little fight. They do have a conversation, though, and agree that they have to stop trying to win with these fights. They need to come together for the sake of their kids. Okay, maybe a little progress was made. Maybe. Renee continues to be interested in Ben, so she has McCluskey help her talk her up to Ben. Renee claims that she loves the elderly and she's always helping out. So Ben takes her to volunteer with him at the senior center. And she thinks that the two of them are just too different to even consider going out with one another because he actually is a little selfless and does nice things. But after a little more discussion, they uncovered that they have a lot of things in common from their childhood. They share a lot of the same fears and baggage and trauma. So maybe it's worth exploring a little more where this relationship could go. Ben is a real estate developer. Since Ben is developing this whole project, there is a lot of potential work for Mike. So he, of course, agrees to it. Ben does find out that Mike is an ex-con, but he's still willing to hire him anyway, which is great news for Mike because his family has just gone through a ton of financial difficulties. Susan, meanwhile, is continuing to feel guilty about what happened. She starts looking for little ways she can get in trouble, like breaking the rules at a grocery store and talking back to a cop. Eventually, she gets arrested for assaulting an officer because she pushes his bike over. She calls Carlos to pick her up though because it's going to be too difficult to explain all of this to Mike. And the two sit and chat for a little while about their shared guilt. I actually really enjoy the screen time that Susan and Carlos share this season. I am pretty sure the only time the two of them have shared a scene together with just the two of them was a few seasons ago when Susan and Gabby both played this trick on their husbands. And I think Carlos and Susan had a short scene in that episode, but these scenes are a lot more earnest. Getting to explore different friendships is really nice in this season. I think it's something they found time for because they didn't have a whole new family to introduce like in some of the other seasons. Season 8, episode 3. Bree tells Gabby she thinks Chuck might be the one who sent her the blackmail letter. Bree decides to snoop through Chuck's briefcase and she finds a picture of her hand and also an envelope with her name on it, which she and Gabby suspect might be some kind of evidence he's holding against her. Chuck is planning to take her out to a nice dinner, so of course she goes. The envelope is stuffed into his jacket pocket. With the help of Gabby, she takes it out of his pocket and slips away to the bathroom so that she and Gabby can see what it is. And it is a ring, and he is apparently planning to propose to her. She tells Gabby in the bathroom that she really doesn't want to marry this man. She just started dating, but it's a relief to know he's not blackmailing her. So they go back to the table and Bree ends their relationship and he tells her, if you find yourself in trouble, and I'm pretty sure you will, don't come calling me. You have made a very big mistake. Is that a fucking threat against my mother? Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are, Chuck? The fuck is named Chuck? Charles, grow up. Just kidding. I like the name Chuck. It's a name in Fishing Daisies, so I'm just kidding. It's a joke. Let's talk about Lynette. Sarah Paulson, who plays Lydia, the sister of Lynette Scavo, has returned to us. Lydia is doing really well compared to the last time we saw her. Therapy has clearly paid off. Lydia and Lynette end up having a fight, and when the fiancé sees that ugly side of Lydia, it leads him into wondering if things can really work between the two of them. Lynette ends up intervening to save the relationship and reassure him that it's not Lydia, it's Lynette, and also they're sisters, they drive each other crazy. Really, the point of this whole plot is to have a character tell Lynette that if she wants things to work with Tom, then she really does have to put an effort to change. And Lydia reassures Lynette that it is possible for her to change. It will just take a little time. Susan and Carlos continue spending time with each other. They're going on late night strolls and stuff, and Mike begins to get really suspicious, even thinking that maybe Susan is cheating on him with Carlos. The cops call Susan's house phone and end up referring to Mike as, quote, Mr. Solis. So Susan has to tell him that she was arrested. Despite Mike's suspicions, Carlos and Susan hang out together some more, even ending up in the back of a van together trying to hide from Mike. And there's this moment where the two of them are looking at each other. It almost seems like there might be some tension there and that one of them might lean in for a kiss, but then they're both like, what are we doing? Mike finds them hiding together though and freaks, and he assumes that they really are together. So that night, Carlos and Susan tell Mike the truth together, that Carlos murdered Alejandro and that Susan has been involved in the cover-up. Season 8, episode 4. Gabby is appointed PTA president after an accident involving the current PTA president, and the former president decides the best way to punish Gabby for it is to make her the PTA president. So that's this whole plot, and really it just shows Gabby is incompetent, Gabby's out of touch, Gabby can't do anything right. It's just a filler episode that might have worked in an earlier season, but just doesn't really feel like it fits here because there's so much going on with Gabby. Anyway, I just wanted to mention it. Danielle Vandekamp visits her mom when her marriage falls apart, so she and her son visit Bree, and Danielle tells her that she has a small business and that things are going pretty well so far, but she can't afford an office and all the space she really needs to make the business thrive. So Bree suggests she live with her for a little while and use the test kitchen. She can do whatever she needs, and Bree will kind of help support her. She tells Bree she is selling this type of workout equipment that she makes, and she gets like 100 orders on the very first day. So clearly she has really thought this business through and she's doing really well. So good for Danielle. Well, it turns out the exercise equipment is not that. It is sex swings. Bree is horrified at first and doesn't want to support Danielle in this business anymore because she thinks it's disgusting and immoral and whatever. But Danielle calls her out and says that she is working hard and the business is doing well and it's something that she loves. By the way, Renee purchases one from her. Classic. There's also a scene where Bree sits in the sex swing and Renee like pushes her around and then Bree gets stuck in the sex swing. It's a whole thing. At the end, though, Bree acknowledges she made the wrong call and that in order to be the supportive mother she really wants to be, she is going to support Danielle with this small business, even if she doesn't like the product herself. She is going to become a silent investor, give her a bunch of money to help her out with the small business so that she can have a good life with her son. Although this almost feels like filler at first, I think what it shows us about Bree as a mother and how far she's come is really important, and I didn't want to skip over that. Meanwhile, Chuck wants to find something juicy on Bree because he is so mad at her for humiliating him and not marrying him after they've been dating for like a week. He goes through some missing persons reports and finds one that has a picture of Alejandro. In this episode, Renee tells Lynette she thinks Tom might be seeing someone. He's like dressing nicer and working out and putting in more effort into himself, and that is the only explanation Renee can come up with. The two of them go to this workout class hosted by this young woman named Chloe, and they suspect that Tom might be seeing Chloe, who's like this young woman who's also a lingerie model. Tom finally tells Lynette that he is seeing someone, but it's not Chloe. It's Chloe's mother, Jane, who is pictured here on the wall. Jane is a doctor, she's smart, she's beautiful, and Lynette is like, yep, I'm fucked. Tom also says he wasn't necessarily keeping this a secret from Lynette. He was planning to tell her on Thursday in their couples counseling session. Is this true? I don't know. But whether or not he was keeping it a secret is not really the issue here. We will discuss next episode. And lastly, we begin a new Susan subplot this episode. So she wants to enroll in this art class at the community college. At first, the teacher doesn't really like her because he thinks that she's boring and doesn't have anything deep and dark within her. And even the stuff she draws and tries to show, like she has dark secrets within, comes off as really shallow. So he's like, no, you don't have potential. She has a monologue where she destroys a paint canvas and says, you want to know about pain? I have pain inside. And I'd probably eat the scene up if it came from a character other than Susan, but it is a very good Susan scene. We also actually get to see her portfolio in this episode and some of her children's artwork, and it's actually good. Like, it's kind of surprising because in seasons 1 and 2, I think I dragged her a few times because she'll draw something for Mike and like but in this one we get like, I think it's like a little family of rabbits, and it's really cute. So I was like, good for her. Okay, good for her. Let her in the art class. After this passionate plea where she destroys an art canvas, she is accepted into the community college art program. It's taught by an artist that she really respects. So good for Susan for finding something that she's passionate about to spend her time on. Season 8, episode 5. Mike is upset with Carlos for dragging Susan into this whole mess. Carlos starts drinking pretty heavily, and he ends up showing up at one of Gabby's PTA meetings completely drunk and humiliating her. Although this does allow the other women to see her as a little more sympathetic because they see that her life is not as perfect as it looks. So on one hand, the filler from the episode before pays off a little bit. There are a lot of other ways they could have gotten Gabby into working on an event with other moms at school, but it is what it is. Like, it's not that deep. As it turns out, Bree has not been going to church lately. In fact, it has been 5 weeks since she has gone, The pastor stops by her home to talk to her, see how she's doing, and find out why she's been missing from church. She tells him that she just hasn't felt all that worthy of God's love lately, and presumably this means that the guilt has been eating away at Bree as well. She ends up doing some volunteering to try and make herself feel better, but then it gets out of hand and it doesn't go the way she wants, so she has to leave that project. I'm not going to go into that whole thing. And she learns an important lesson in the end that she's able to articulate really well. So Ben asks her to make another speech the next day to help him push through a low-income housing project he wants to build. He has to push it through city council first, though. So she makes an amazing speech and advocates for the housing to be built. So to kind of celebrate and show her more about the project, Ben takes her to the site where the housing will be built. And it is the woods where they buried Alejandro. The Scavos attend marriage counseling, and the main thing they discuss is the reason for the separation. Is the separation meant so they can find a good way to end their marriage? Or is the separation meant so they can have a little space to work things out and get back together? They never discussed dating, but Tom is dating, and he wants to have sex with this woman soon, so Lynette is like, okay, fine. Then I will go out and do the same thing. So she goes out to a bar. It's a really iffy night at the bar. No one's interested. She doesn't know how to make conversation with anyone. But then she meets a guy who is also newly divorced, has kids, and those are both things that are like going to be hard to explain to anyone. So just having that in common, Lynette feels a little hopeful. She ends up going home with him. When they go back to his place, though, he like offers her a juice box, and oh, to have juice box with a newly separated mom of 6. Dream date. They make out, and Lynette decides she needs to get her ring off before she can like go any further. But she drops the ring, and then she's looking for her ring. She starts to panic, and she realizes that making out with this guy is like the scariest thing she can possibly do right now, and she just wants to go home. The guy is really chill about her changing her mind, but of course, this whole thing has just been a nightmare for Lynette, so she is feeling pretty shitty. Season 8, Episode 6. It is our Halloween episode. Bree, Gabby, and Lynette venture into the woods to move Alejandro's body. They're gonna have to find somewhere else to put it since this land is all gonna be developed. They reach the grave, they look shocked, and then we cut to 3 days earlier. Bree informs Gabby of the planned construction site, and the three of them agree they're gonna have to do something about it. The original plan is just to try and get the construction site moved somewhere else. Ben tells Bree that the last city's project got tossed because an environmental group found endangered frogs in the land where it was going to be built. So Bree and Gabby go to that land, find some frogs, and try to bring them all to this new site, but it goes horribly wrong. But we get them in really cute, like, waiting outfits. There's also these adorable pictures of Marsha Cross and Eva Longoria behind the scenes of this episode. Because it's season 8, we are finally reaching the age of social media, so we got a lot of behind the scenes of the final season, and I'll show you those pictures here because adorable. Ben asks Renee to come over for dinner on Halloween, and she makes him get down on his knees and beg her, and then she accepts his invitation. Season 8, Episode 7. In the previous episode, when everyone was looking shocked at the ground, it turns out it's because the body was already removed. So that has created this whole new level of chaos and fear. With the body missing, Gabby is beginning to worry more and more about possibly going to jail should they get caught for all of this. Susan is currently Juanita and Celia's godmother, but obviously if Carlos go to prison for the murder of Alejandro / cover-up, Susan is gonna be fucked too. So they need to find people who are not connected to this whole thing. So they approach Bob and Lee and ask them if they will be the godfathers of Juanita and Celia. At first, they say no because Juanita and Celia are not very well-behaved girls, but Gabby tells them that the girls have grown up, they've changed, they have more discipline now, so you just have to give them a chance. So Bob and Lee come over for dinner. Everything goes really well and the girls are well-behaved until Gabby and Carlos walk the guys out, and the garage door goes down. Juanita has written on the garage door, "Gays are stupid." Before we get any Juanita homophobic allegations in the chat, let me clarify that Juanita tells her mom that the reason she did this is because she's upset and scared because she thinks something's wrong. Her assumption is that Carlos is dying because Carlos is sleeping all the time and he's really sad. And now it seems like Gabby and Carlos want to give the girls away. So she's really not able to understand what happened. Bree hears from Ben that they found the body while they were doing soil samples. He's upset because once this is reported to the police, the whole construction site will be shut down as a crime scene, which means he will be out a ton of time and money. So Bree encourages him just to bury the body and continue on with the project. She then goes to the place where the body was found and Ben finds her there. Ben clearly sees that Bree knows something about this body. She tells him that he was a horrible man and that she did not kill him. Ben tells her he's sorry, but he can't keep this secret and he has to go to the police. If the crime is solved, it means the whole construction site won't be shut down for as long. But later, Chuck stops by Bree's house to ask her about this man, Ramon Sanchez, which is the name associated with Alejandro in the missing persons file. She tells him she knows nothing, but Chuck gets up on her face and Ben swoops in to tell him to back the fuck off. Then Ben tells Bree that he decided to get rid of the body after all. Jane and Penny are really starting to develop a bond, so Renee suggests that Lynette stop acting like a doormat and do something about it. Penny doesn't show up for her one-on-one time she has planned with Tom, and Lynette tells Renee that it seems like Jane isn't the one ruining her family. It might be Lynette after all, so Lynette takes Penny to spend time with her father. And she tells Penny there are no bad guys in this situation. We are all just a family trying to figure things out. And once Penny runs off to spend time with Tom, Lynette sobs in the car. Ben then stops by to request Mike's help disposing of the dead body. Mike, in order to protect Susan and her friends, tells Ben that he will take care of the body. This is how Susan finds out that there was a problem with the body at all. So she goes over to break the news to Bree, Lynette, and Gabby, who she assumes also have not heard about this. But then Gabby says something about the blackmail letter, which Lynette knows nothing about. So now all of the women are mad that they are suddenly keeping secrets from each other. All of these secrets between the girls have really made an impact on the state of their friendship, and Susan needs to do something to let out her anger and fear and anxiety over this. So what does she do? She paints a photo of 4 best friends burying a body together. And then she presents it to her professor, of course. Now, as a woman in comedy / a woman in the arts, I do have to give credit where credit is due and say that this painting is beautiful and it's very evocative and I love it. It's just that maybe people are starting to suspect something's wrong and somebody did a murder. Don't paint a confession that will implicate you and all your best friends. Maybe. But it's beautiful. So good job, Susan. Season 8, Episode 8, Carlos continues to struggle with his developing alcoholism. So Gabby insists that in order for him to detox and start his journey to sobriety, he should just stay home from work for a few days because man is like drunk. He cannot go to work. So she goes in to try and keep any trouble from brewing at work, but she accidentally helps this really slimy guy almost poach one of Carlos's biggest clients, which would result in millions of dollars lost in the company and likely Carlos in losing his job. Then it is exposed to this big client that, quote, Carlos is a drunk. So Gabby takes this man to the Solis house and she tries to warn Carlos, who is asleep on the couch and still drunk. Of course, we're like, oh my God, Carlos is going to lose his job. The Solis family is going to be broke again. This is disastrous. But turns out this man is 14 years sober himself, so he wants to help Carlos. And just because he's going through this doesn't mean that he should lose a good client. So shout out to this man. He helps Carlos find a good rehab, and Carlos gets checked into rehab. Oh my God, I just got a text from a friend. She's asking me if I have a psychiatrist I like. Girl, I got Rex for you. In the Vandekamp household, Bree thinks she hears somebody break in the middle of the night. So she calls 911 and Chuck hears over the radio, so goes over to check it out. Chuck warns her in a somewhat menacing way that makes him look a little sus that somebody is probably just trying to rattle her and make her feel unsafe. We have established by this point that it's most likely that Chuck is not the one who sent that blackmail letter, but we still don't know who it was, so there could be literally anyone trying to fuck with Bree right now. Chuck later goes back to harass Bree some more, trying to question her about this missing man, who again is Alejandro, but he's under a different name. During questioning, he tells her that he doesn't think that she killed this man, but he thinks that one of her friends might have, and that she's trying to protect him. She tells Chuck that he's right, she would do anything for her friends, and against that, he is powerless. And then she tells him to get the hell off her street. Over in Scavoland, it is Lynette and Tom's wedding anniversary, and she receives flowers from Tom. So she's like, oh my god, we're still gonna do our cute little wedding anniversary tradition. So she goes out and buys him a nice bottle of scotch and goes over to his apartment to bring the scotch to him. She gets into the apartment. I don't remember how. I think like the kids have the key, and since this is supposed to be a wedding anniversary surprise, she also assumes that he's like kind of on the same page since he sent her flowers. You know what I mean? So she's there sitting super happy with her little bottle of scotch, thinking this is going to be the great reunion they've been waiting for. And then he gets home with Jane, and Lynette hides under the bed, and Tom and Jane almost end up fucking, but then she comes out from under the bed and is like, oh my god, I'm right here. The flowers were set to auto-deliver every year. Now, I sort of knew this was coming because they pulled this in season 1 when Paul receives flowers meant for Mary Alice for her birthday because he had them on an auto renew thing every year. And Felicia Tillman sees the flowers and is like, oh my god, who are those for? You know, that was the whole thing. So I knew their tricks this time. Tom completely forgot about their anniversary. He tells Lynette he is so sorry and that he will cancel the standing order with the florist in the morning. So that's how we know the Scavo marriage, as far as Tom is concerned, is over. An art dealer shows up to Susan's community college art class. He is played by Leslie Jordan, by the way. And out of everyone's paintings, he loves Susan's murder confession painting. And it's actually a whole series of paintings. He tells her he wants to put them up on an art show he's doing, and Susan is like, no, but Leslie Jordan and Andre, the art teacher, think that Susan is just being a little shy and just needs a little push. So when Susan shows up to the art show that night, her art is plastered on the wall for everyone to see. She immediately calls Bree and Gabby and asks them to come and help her get the paintings down. And the women have to spend $10,000 to buy all the paintings. And they're like, we want to take them home right now. And then Chuck shows up. He sees the paintings and he's like, oh, I see a painting of 4 best friends burying a body, and look, there's a redhead, and look, there's a blonde. That must be Lynette. There is now evidence for Chuck to pursue, but my thing is, let's think about this, okay? Let's just take a second. I am not Susan Meyer, thank God. But if I was, and I had a picture, a beautiful painting, I will say, of 4 friends and a dead body, and there's something mysterious about it, dark, creepy, there's secrets involved. Let's think about this. Yes, I would say, that brunette, that is me. And that smaller brunette, that is my friend, Gabrielle. That redhead is my friend, Bree. And that blonde is my friend, Lynette. And here we are, all mourning over our dead friend, Mary Alice Young, who had so many secrets, and it's been such a weight on all of us for all these years. But I did see a tweet yesterday, and it's an ongoing discussion that sometimes TV only continues and has conflict because characters do stupid things. I guess in their panic, they just could not think of any other explanation, even if it meant yeah, we're still in the painting, but it's not what you think. So anyways, it's a disaster now, and Susan tells Andre when he asks how she feels about her paintings being sold that she is absolutely miserable, and he says, well, you've made it as an artist. So the girls are in deep shit now, and meanwhile, the Scavo marriage is confirmed over. They will probably be divorced, right? So Lynette gets home, and she puts her wedding ring in a jewelry box, and then when Bree gets home, she pours herself a glass of wine. Season 8, Episode 9. Gabby, Lynette, and Susan are questioned by police following the discovery by Chuck with the painting. And Gabby lets it slip that Carlos recently developed a drinking problem. So it's pointed out to them that this type of quickly onset dependence on alcohol often comes from some sort of stressful event or trauma. And they're like, no, nothing I can think of. But then Gabby is like, yep, Carlos had an affair. So now Chuck needs to investigate and find out if that's true. And Gabby begins scheming her way into the rehab so she can alert Carlos of the new plan. Now, because they have all been caught by Chuck, all of the girls blame Bree for everything going wrong. Also because Bree was kind of like the ringleader of the whole cover-up. They will just not speak to her anymore. She brings them scones to try and open up a conversation and they can work things out, but the girls all turn her away. Lynette, in fact, tells her, there is no us, no friendship, not anymore. You're on your own. We all are. So Bree goes home and pours herself another glass of wine. Bree has a drunk night out. She knocked on Ben's front door at 2 a.m, and so he ended up helping her out, making sure she got home and everything. Bree then visits Chuck at work, and desperate to do anything she can to save her friendship, she offers Chuck a deal that she will sign a confession of anything he wants, so she'll be locked up as long as he leaves her friends out of it. But Chuck tells her that harming her friends is what he wants because that's the only way that he can really hurt her since she is so emotionless. We also get confirmation once again that the reason he's doing all this is not because he cares about his job or justice, obviously, but because Bree broke his heart and turned him down. After doing some more research about Ramon Sanchez, aka Alejandro Perez, on the missing persons report, he discovers, based on images, that he is Gabby's stepfather. He wants Bree and Gabby to be at the station at 10 a.m., and it's really starting to look like it is over for them and they have been caught. Chuck tells Ben the man last had cell phone activity ping to the construction site, which means the construction site will be shut down. And I think all of this is coming from the same probe once he started to suspect all women were involved in the cover-up. As I said, Ben helped Bree that morning, and now Bree is taking off somewhere driving, and Renee sees her leave, and she thinks this is a little suspicious because she has begun to suspect that Ben and Bree are having an affair. When Gabby gets to rehab to try and talk to him about the whole situation, Carlos is gone. He has checked out and left, and no one knows where he went. For the Scavos, now that things have gotten really bad and they are about to be caught for this murder, Lynette decides she needs to tell Tom about what's happening, especially because she really doesn't have the girls to support her anymore. So she goes to the airport where Tom and Jane are ready to leave on a trip to Paris, and she goes into the bathroom to talk to Tom and tell him about what's going on. Tom cannot believe that Lynette has found a way to ruin everything about his relationship with Jane. Apparently, it already took her enough convincing after the whole anniversary night to not worry about Lynette ruining things. So Lynette is forced to just say plainly, I am an accessory to murder. Jane walks in on them talking and obviously is very upset that Lynette seems to be everywhere, ruining everything for her. Lynette just tells Jane that it is a family emergency and she does apologize. Tom decides not to go to Paris because Lynette needs him there for the kids. It really is for the kids' sake. Lynette reassures Jane that this is not Tom's fault at all and he really did not have any other choice because of something going on in the family. But it doesn't matter at this point. Jane is very upset. For Susan, there's this whole thing where the art dealer wants her to move to New York to pursue art, and she begins to consider it, but Mike really doesn't want to go. He likes his life in Wisteria Lane. Susan partially really likes the idea because if she is going to go away for murder at some point in the relatively near future, she would at least like a chance to live this big artist life dream. Okay, to wrap up the episode, remember, Carlos is missing. Bree drives off. There's a lot of moving pieces. This context is important. The women's friendship is crumbling, and Bree is entirely alone and drinking again. And Chuck is willing to do anything it takes to take her down, including hurt all of her friends. As Chuck is crossing the street, a car comes out of nowhere and hits him. It's not confirmed yet, but I would like to do this now. Mary Alice has a voiceover line that says, just when my friends need each other the most, they found themselves entirely alone. Bree checks into a motel room with a bottle of wine, some stationery, and a gun, and she has a vision of Mary Alice. It's very similar to the season 1, episode 11 vision of Mary Alice that Lynette has when she is sobbing in her kitchen as her boys are making a disaster. And Bree tells this ghost of Mary Alice, I had the perfect life. What happened? Season 8, episode 10. Bree has written a suicide note and she puts a gun to her head. She's sitting on a bed in a nice nightgown and she is about to pull the trigger when Renee kicks down the door because she has come to look for Ben, who she thinks Bree is having an affair in this motel with. Bree starts begging Renee to go, but Renee says she's not leaving until she finds Ben, and then she notices the gun on the nightstand and asks what exactly is going on. She reads a suicide note and asks Bree if she was really going to go through with it, to which Bree can only cry, and then Renee pulls Bree into her arms and Bree sobs. Mary Alice's voiceover is, Renee would never know just how close Bree had come to taking her own life. And Bree would never know just how close she had come to getting hit. Because Renee came in ready to beat the shit out of her for taking her man. It's really funny. But anyways, women support women. And when Bree wakes up the next morning, Renee is in her home making her breakfast. Even when Bree tells Renee that she's not her friend and she doesn't have to be there to take care of her, Renee tells her she's not going anywhere until she knows that Bree is safe. Renee also tells Bree that she will never go through losing someone to suicide again. Once again referencing the death of her own mother. Later in the episode, Renee ends up telling Bree that her mother took her own life. Bree tells Renee that a close friend of her and the other girls committed suicide several years ago. Renee had no idea about Mary Alice, so this is all news to her. Now, why she didn't learn any of this when Paul was on the lane last year, not totally sure. Like, wasn't she nosy at all? But maybe she just knew that Mary Alice had passed away. I don't know. Anyways, Bree tells Renee that she will always be the person who saved her life, and she's very grateful to her. Susan secretly gets a cab. She's going to go to the airport and go to New York City. And Micah's like, girl, you are just running away from your problems. And Susan is like, maybe so. So she needs to do something that will more directly address her problems. And for her, she decides she needs to go to Oklahoma and find Alejandro's new family, just so she can try and give them some sort of closure, since obviously they are still looking for this guy. So that is Susan's new plan. In Scavoland, Tom is pissed at Lynette at first for this whole ruining his trip, but also being an accessory to murder thing. And he tells her that he's going to fix everything for them. So he has hired Bob, told him everything. So now Bob knows. And he's like, don't even worry. We've got a lawyer. And then news breaks that Chuck has died in a hit and run, meaning they all told Bob for nothing. So they're like, I guess we don't need you, Bob. Bob takes the bottle of scotch that was meant for Tom for his anniversary and leaves. The girls all meet to discuss the death of Chuck, and none of them know who could have done this, assuming it wasn't an accident. I believe police have put together that this was likely intentional because there are no skid marks on the road or things that would be more typical in an accidental hit and run. They wonder if maybe Carlos might have done it, but Gabby's like, oh, he's still in rehab. Don't worry. He's not in rehab. So we're like, oh my God. Lynette and Bree begin to discuss privately who might have committed the hit and run. They make a little chart and everything. And I did, by the way, adapt it into a Wisteria Lane L-word chart. Here's my Wisteria Lane version, made using the chart they make in this episode. So I think they would love my chart, and maybe they should have done this. Besides the ones who were there and helped bury the body, the only people who know are Tom, Mike, and Ben, plus whoever sent this letter to Bree, assuming they are not one of those people. And then, of course, Chuck, but Chuck didn't hit Chuck with a car. At Chuck's funeral, Tom tells Lynette that despite everything, he still cares very deeply for her. So Lynette invites him over for a movie night with the kids, and the family sits and has a little family movie night, and it's very sweet. And finally, Bree receives a second note, and this one just says, "You're welcome," therefore confirming that the author of the notes is the one who killed Chuck. Season 8, Episode 11. Bree shares the note with the women, Lynette and Gabby specifically, and all of them decide that it is likely somebody who has something against Bree who is sending the note. Therefore, Lynette and Gabby decide to forgive each other, but they're going to stay mad at Bree. We see someone watching Bree from their car, therefore confirming that it is someone connected to Bree somehow. And later, Renee asks Bree to go out with her for a night. So they go out to the bar. Bree has some drinks. She's not very good at flirting though. But Renee really gives her encouragement to cut it loose a little bit, which is not really something Bree does. Bree does end up flirting with a man, and once she is good and drunk, she ends up telling him, quote, "Sometimes I think I only married him to lose my virginity." And then Bree lets this guy take her home and they make out. And then it turns out to be his boss's house. And he just wanted to look cool with this big fancy house and pool and stuff. Bree seems to have had fun when she tells Renee about it the next day. So Bree goes back to the bar the next night and lets some guy take her home. Once again, someone watches her leave the bar. Lynette is trying to fix a flickering light in the house, but she can't find the secondary fuse box. So she puts a hole in the wall and then she cries, and she's realizing that having to run the household without any help from Tom whatsoever is just not something she ever imagined she would have to do. And she wishes she could have gotten all this information from Tom before they were fully separated. Mike is almost screwed over by Ben money-wise. There is definitely something shady going on with Ben and his finances. And later, Mike walks into the office at the construction site and finds that Ben is taking a loan from some notorious loan shark, to which Mike tells the loan shark to get out and never come back, and then warns Ben that these are really dangerous people. He has no business doing business with them whatsoever. He has no business talking to them whatsoever. So with the loan shark seemingly no longer a possibility, Ben becomes more interested in Renee's money. As you may recall, when she divorced the Yankee baseball player she was with, she got a huge divorce settlement. Susan visits Alejandro's new family. He has a wife named Claudia and a stepdaughter named Marissa. Claudia's house is being sold because there is no money with Alejandro gone. Now, Susan obviously can't tell them why she's there, so she just pretends to be interested in the house. But she ends up buying some Legos from them just as an excuse to give them money. And she makes up some lie that they're collectible Americana Legos and they're really rare, first edition or something. It's this whole thing. So Susan gives them a check, and she sees Marissa, the stepdaughter, who looks really upset and uncomfortable, especially when the husband, Ramon, is brought up. Later on, Susan goes back to the house and talks to Marissa herself and makes a promise that Alejandro, or Ramon, is never coming back. Of course, Marissa tells her mother, Claudia, about the conversation with Susan. Season 8, Episode 12. If you thought Bree had a hoe era with Carl, buckle up, bitch, because she has taken home guy after guy from the bar. And I want to be clear that this is not an act of sexual liberation or something that she would normally do. It's likely influenced highly by alcohol and also a wish to self-harm. She's very hush-hush about these choices and always makes the men leave at 4 or 5 a.m. before any of her neighbors can wake up. So she'll set an alarm for 3:30 or 4 in the morning, wake the guy up and tell him he's gotta go, and then give him a muffin from her little muffin basket and is like, "Thanks for having sex with me, have a lovely morning." That element of it is really funny, but it's also really disturbing because we are watching Bree make such destructive choices. And by the way, I'm not saying that having a bunch of hookups automatically is a destructive choice, but this is Bree we're talking about, and we see her drinking. McCluskey comes over, and Bree still has a guest over because the man shut off the alarm. McCluskey notices that she has had quite a few guys over because she wakes up really early for a morning walk and also sometimes for the bathroom in the middle of the night. This is when she also sees that Bree has a half-empty wine bottle, which she immediately knows is concerning. After Mrs. McCluskey reaches out to Reverend Sykes, he goes to pick Bree up from the bar and try to talk her out of making these choices. She tells him she's been following him for years and still feels lost, so maybe she needs to search for herself here instead. There's a church bake sale. Reverend Sykes does not want her to go until she's cleaned up her act, but in the morning, Bree is making a strawberry tart for the bake sale and drinking and drinking and drinking wine. She sees one of her one-night stands at the bake sale, and the two strike up a conversation, and then it turns out he's married. So it creates this big scene. Bree is basically called the town whore, and she struts out of there with her head held high. Although Bree is not as repressed as she was in season 1, there's still enough going on here for us to know that, like, something is wrong. Bree is truly broken and behaving in ways that do not reflect her. So even though scenes like this, they do have a sense of humor in them, it's really sad because we know that Bree is just not herself right now. Lynette is ready to try and start dating. She gets set up with Renee's hairdresser, Frank, because he seems a little interested in her. The first date does not go very well because the things that went wrong in his previous marriage are all flaws that Lynette has, so she totally upsets him on the first date, and he decides to take revenge by fucking up Renee's hair. I'm sorry, but if you think a bad date is a reason to completely fuck up a black woman's hair because she set you up with her friend, grow up. Once again, possibly motivated by money, Ben decides to propose to Renee. Renee ends up crying and says yes and tells Ben how safe she feels with him, which makes Ben feel guilty. So he confesses that he's really interested in her money, and the two break up. He says he's an awful person, and that's why he wanted to marry her. So she storms out, and good for her. On Wisteria Lane, Ben gets into a car with the shady loan shark from before, and the man looks over at the Delfino Meyer home and is like, "So that's where Tough Guy lives, huh?" Referring to Mike. Ben, not wanting to use Renee's money, has decided he will borrow from this loan shark. The man tells him he missed one payment. Missed 2 payments. You don't want to know what happens if you miss 2 payments. And then he says he understands that Ben's girlfriend has a lot of money, and Ben warns him to keep her out of it. In continuation of the Alejandro family Susan storyline, Claudia, Alejandro's wife, shows up and asks Susan where Ramon is, assuming that Ramon has left Claudia to be with Susan instead. She starts putting up missing persons photos of Ramon/Alejandro around the neighborhood. So Susan ends up telling Gabby about how she got involved and that she thinks Alejandro hurt Marissa as well. Gabby tells Susan she will talk to Claudia and get the situation worked out. While Marissa waits outside, Gabby tells Claudia the truth about Alejandro and how he molested her as a child when she was his stepdaughter. Claudia does not believe her whatsoever and thinks that she is telling malicious lies just to hurt her and break up her family for some reason. Meanwhile, outside, Susan asks Marissa if she has ever said anything to her mom, and she says no because she probably wouldn't believe her, and because she loves Alejandro so much. Just as Claudia is insisting to Gabby that Ramon would never do anything to hurt Marissa, Marissa steps inside with Susan and says that everything Gabby is saying is the truth. Later, Claudia and Marissa stop by to thank Susan and Gabby for everything and to say goodbye because they're going to go back home and they will no longer be concerned about where Alejandro/Ramon is. This is when Claudia notices a red stain on Gabby's carpet, and she's like, "Oh, you said you spilled wine there?" And Gabby's like, "Uh-huh." And Claudia says, "You better get that cleaned up." And Gabby says, "Uh-huh," insinuating she thinks she knows what happened, but it's not her business anymore. Season 8, episode 13. Juanita is really missing Carlos while he's in rehab, and Gabby has just been telling her that Carlos is away in Europe for a business trip. To try and make Juanita feel better, Gabby starts meddling in this Valentine's Day thing, and she makes it look like this boy Juanita liked made her a card, but it backfires, and now Juanita believes that all Gabby does is lie to her. And Gabby insists, "I don't lie to you," and Juanita replies with, "Okay then, where's Daddy?" So Gabby decides that she is old enough and grown up enough to be told the truth about where Carlos is. Lynette goes out on her second first date with Frank, and the two end up having sex. Renee stops by the next morning to ask Lynette how everything went, and Lynette admits that she cried right in the middle of doing it with this man. He will probably never ever speak to her, want to see her again, but he was very nice in the moment and said and did all the right things. Lynette explains that she cried because she realized that sleeping with this man meant that she considered her marriage to Tom truly over. Later, Frank goes over to Lynette's with pizza and he wants to hang out and have a little date with her. No pressure. And she says, "Do you have some unresolved mother issues or something? Because that's the only reason I can think of why you would come back here again." Julie calls Susan and she sounds a little blue on the phone, and she's going to be visiting for the first time in about 6 months. When Julie arrives, it turns out she is 6 months pregnant. This is a total shock to Susan and Mike and MJ. Julie explains to Susan that the father was just a casual thing. He's not involved. He doesn't know. Julie is okay with that because she's planning to give the baby up for adoption. Julie tells Susan she really needs her support through this, and Mike is clearly ready to support Julie with whatever decision she makes, but Susan is not. So Susan sabotages the dinner that Julie has with a prospective couple who wants to adopt the baby. And later, Julie tells Susan she does not want to be a single mother because her experience with Susan was terrible. In fact, Julie tells Susan, quote, "I already raised a child. You." I just can't believe if we got to acknowledge this. I'm someone who's very sensitive to this type of mother-daughter relationship, so actually getting to see the realization from the adult child that they raised their own parent, love, and I do not fucking blame her a bit. Julie does end up telling Susan that she's having a baby girl. Okay, lastly for Bree in this episode, the women all see that Bree has had yet another gentleman caller. As they put their minds together and share the different guys they've seen, they realize there's a lot of men Bree is taking home. Once again, a mysterious man watches Bree from outside the bar. During Renee's chat with Lynette, she ends up telling her that she took Bree out, and Lynette is like, "You took Bree drinking?" So now the women find out that Bree is off the wagon, and in Renee's defense, she had no idea that Bree is an alcoholic. And Bree takes another guy home. The three women are waiting at her house to do something of an intervention. They seem to think they know everything and that they can help Bree, but she says, "Did you also know I tried to kill myself?" Which the women did not, with the exception of Renee. All she was to them, according to Bree in this scene, was a leader and someone to get them out of trouble. And then as soon as things got rough, it became all Bree's fault. They all say they wish that Bree had told them she was struggling. She says that she tried, but when she went and tried to apologize to them with the scones, they slammed the door in her face. And so now Bree does not want their help. At the bar that night, a man gets really forward with Bree. When she rejects him, he says, "Everyone here knows what you are," implying that she would sleep with literally anyone. Again, she rejects him and leaves the bar, but he follows her outside. She drops her keys. He grabs them from her. He grabs her. He's ready to stick her in his car. It's a disaster. And then Orson Hodge approaches with a taser and tells the man to leave her alone. Bree cannot believe Orson, of all people, is there. He explains that her friends called him because she needed help. Bree breaks down and says, "Orson, I've made such a mess of my life." And Orson replies, "One of the things we were always best at was cleaning things up." So has support arrived for Miss Vandekamp? I don't know. Season 8, Episode 14. Bree opens up to Orson about what really happened at that dinner party. Orson responds to this by saying he really can't believe that her friends took advantage of her like that and then just left her out to dry. And Mary Alice's voiceover tells us, yes, Orson Hodge knew that Bree was the perfect woman for him. Now that he had her back, he had no intention of letting her go. Orson sees the three friends, and when they ask what he's doing there, he tells them that he was driving by the bar and saw Bree, saw that she needed help, and intervened. So now we know Orson was not called by the girls. Bree and Orson spend a few quiet days together, just unpacking all the shit that has happened in Bree's life and him taking care of her the best he can. And then Orson asks Bree to move with him to his aunt's cabin. Of course, the main reason she would want to stay on Wisteria Lane is because all of her friends live there, but he tells her that her friends have not come by. Of course, this is a lie. They did come by. He is just conniving and scheming. Back at Orson's apartment, we see that he has been stalking Bree for a while and that he is indeed the person who A, wrote the notes to Bree and B, killed Chuck. Something I feel is important to acknowledge is that this is Orson's second attempted murder, although it is his first successful murder via hit and run. Back at the end of season 2, he attempted to kill Mike Delfino by running him down in the middle of the road. In the Scavo home, Porter and Preston come home and beg Lynette to let them in, but she says no because they are grown adults. If they have some sort of issue, they need to work it out. And first they try saying, we're children of divorce, but that doesn't work. So then they say they don't like their dad's new girlfriend, so Lynette lets them in. While the twins are there and able to overhear the conversation, Susan tells Lynette that Julie is pregnant, and the twins look at each other and are totally stunned. Julie tells Susan she's going to have coffee with the father of her baby to discuss everything with him, so Susan goes to the coffee shop in hopes of seeing him, and it turns out to be Porter Scavo. So Lynette and Susan are going to be grandparents together. Porter wants to keep the kid and raise it, but Lynette tells Susan that Porter is not ready for that. Porter tells Lynette that things are going to change and he's going to do whatever he has to do. He already loves this baby and he feels like his life has already changed. Mike goes to the construction site after dark to get a check to someone, and then the construction site blows up. There's someone skulking around, so Mike runs after them since this person kind of almost killed him. And it turns out to be Ben. And Ben admits to Mike that he is in way over his head with this loan shark thing. And then Ben's chest feels really tight and Mike takes him to the hospital. Mike calls Renee to inform her that Ben is in the hospital. It wasn't a heart attack, but he's not in great shape. And in the hospital, Ben tells Renee the truth about taking money from someone who is very dangerous, and Renee tells him that she will take care of it. So Renee indeed pays off the loans in order to keep Ben and the company and Mike safe. And finally, Mrs. McCluskey kicks Roy out. Roy tells Gabby how utterly heartbroken he is by this, and then we cut to Mrs. McCluskey at the doctor. We learn that her cancer is back and has metastasized to her brain, and the drugs are no longer working, meaning this is terminal and she doesn't have very long left to live. McCluskey dumped him because he already lost his first wife to illness and she doesn't want to put him through all of that pain again. Season 8, episode 15. To start out, we'll go to the Solises, and just an update, Carlos is home from rehab. Orson attempts to continue on with his plan to win back Bree's heart for good, but he accidentally lets it slip that he knows that there were 2 letters when Bree only ever told him about 1. Luckily for Orson, he's able to quickly cover this by saying that Lynette told him about it, and he didn't want to tell Bree Lynette told him because he thought it would upset her that her friends betrayed her trust yet again. The pair are indeed planning to go at least visit his aunt's cabin for a while, and she wants him to get the hat he has that matches hers, so they have to go back to his apartment. Orson is hoping that he can manage the situation without Bree ever getting into his apartment, but she does end up inside and sees all the evidence that he has been the one stalking her and sending her blackmail over the last few weeks. Now that she's caught him, he confesses to what he's done and explains that as long as the girls are in her life, he will never be the most important person to her. Bree tells him she never wants to see him again and leaves. This scene and the scene where Bree refuses the women's help from 2 episodes ago, some of Marcia's finest work in the show. I feel like every season she has a couple scenes where she truly just shines. But if I ever do a thread breaking down her performance, like I have done for some other iconic TV performances in the past on my Twitter, I think these two scenes will probably both be included because fuck, dude, like it's just so heavy out here. Later, Orson calls Bree and says goodbye forever, implying that he is going to end his own life. Once he hangs up, we see Orson drop an envelope addressed to the Fairview Police Department into a mailbox. At the hospital, Renee tells Ben that she's settled the account with the loan shark. But when she's at home on Wisteria Lane, the man comes by and asks her for more money. Renee says she will not be intimidated by this man, but he replies by saying that she does not decide when they're done, he decides. Later, Mike discovers the loan shark is at Renee's, trashing her house in order to threaten her. Mike intervenes, they end up in a fist fight, and not gonna lie, Mike kind of wins this one. He beats the shit out of this guy, and he tells him he never wants to see him again, to which the man responds, then you should have killed me. Afterwards, Mike helps Renee clean up the mess at her place. Mike is kind of a champ and even a good man, if I do say so myself. I appreciate that he tried to stop Ben from getting into this mess in the first place, but at the same time, he helped protect Renee with no hesitation. And finally, for Karen McCluskey, she collapses when Gabby is over visiting, coughing and wheezing. So Gabby now knows about Karen's cancer, and she tells her she thinks she should tell Roy, but Karen explains why she doesn't want to, and she makes Gabby promise that she will not tell him either. However, Gabby feels it's not in Karen's best interest to go through all of this alone, so she does tell Roy the truth, and Roy shows up with flowers at Karen's hospital room and takes her hand. He tells Karen he married her for better or for worse, and Karen tells him she's really scared. Season 8, episode 16, and we are about to enter the third act of the season, so this is very exciting stuff. We kick off the episode with a Mary Alice voiceover telling us in just a few days, one of these people on Wisteria Lane will be dead. The last time we heard this from Mary Alice, I believe, was the tornado episode when they said everyone would lose a friend and one of these women will lose a husband. The friend, of course, was Ida Greenberg and the husband was Victor Lang. Anyways, let's get on to the people on the lane. So Carlos starts giving out a bunch of money to the people at his company who have been laid off because apparently during his time in rehab, he has awoken to the evils of capitalism. My only issue with this Carlos plot is that it kind of happened already in season 5. He really wanted to just do some good, and then it started tearing the family apart, and so he took another job. So now again, he's going to try the same thing. I don't know. We're going to let it play out. Bree ends up telling the women about what happened with Orson, and all of them make up. They think they are now in the clear because that blackmail was the last missing piece in all of this. But then detectives receive the envelope of evidence from Orson, and they send out 2 people to investigate the construction site. For the Scavos, this episode's plot revolves around Penny's birthday party. Tom wants to invite Jane, but because there's so much family and close friends there, this would mean making an official, very public announcement to everyone they know that they are separated and Tom is dating. So Lynette's not really ready for that. Jane also gets very involved in the birthday party and is like trying to be a part of every family photo and everything. So Lynette's upset about that. 2 women fight, and Tom ends up telling Lynette that he is probably going to speak to a lawyer this week about divorce. Do you guys ever miss the pizzeria? Is it just me? Because like if we still had the pizzeria, at least we wouldn't have to go through this. Karen McCluskey asks for Bree's help to kill her because she wants to go in peace. Bree says, yeah, she'll help her, but she keeps like putting it off. And at one point, Mrs. McCluskey lays down behind Bree's car so that when Bree is backing out of her driveway, maybe she'll run her over and kill her. But Bree sees her in time and walks around, and Mrs. McCluskey explains why she's there, and Bree says, I can't kill you today, I have Pilates. And that quote has become one of the most iconic quotes. I actually think that's kind of interesting because I have found that a lot of the most iconic quotes from the show come from either season 1 or like season 7 and 8. I don't know, just an interesting thing I've picked up on. Bree ends up eating a slice of pie, which turns out to be Karen's suicide pie, so she has to go get medical help. Roy tells Karen that he wants her around until it's her natural time to go, and Karen agrees. And finally, for Susan and Mike, Mike is paranoid that this loan shark is now after him because of the threats and what happened at Renee's and everything. So he has a gun, which freaks Susan out, but he explains he thinks this loan shark is after him. So they end up going to the police, and the police say they'll have a patrol car, keep an eye on things, and then they say to call if they see the guy. So with that taken care of, later on in the afternoon, Susan and Mike have a nice chat on the porch. Susan basically says he is such a good guy, you know, kind of just all the stuff I said a minute ago, that he's always looking out for people, and that he's brave and kind, and she's really lucky to have him. And then she gets up to go, I think, start dinner. And this is when the loan shark pulls up in his car, yells, Delfino, and shoots Mike in the chest. So it's broad daylight, and Mike Delfino falls back on his porch as blood spills from his chest. Okay. Season 8, episode 17. Everyone on Wisteria Lane hears the shot. They all rush to Susan's porch. Lynette calls 911, and Mike is dead. Fuck, that sucks. Funeral preparations begin, and when I watched this episode, I was actually almost surprised by how emotional I got. I also sobbed at this as a teenager, but for whatever reason, I thought it wouldn't affect me as much. It did. Similar to how other episodes post a major character death have gone, there's flashbacks and a lot of self-reflection for each character in this one. So we'll just kind of go through and talk about what each character learns. First off, Susan has a bit of a flashback to her wedding night with Mike. She thinks it would be romantic if he did something like read her a poem or sing her a song, but he doesn't know much art like that. So when the pastor who will be doing the service comes by and asks if Mike had a favorite book or poem or anything, Susan doesn't have anything for him. But on their wedding night, Mike had said to Susan, I love you once, I love you twice, I love you more than beans and rice. And so at the funeral, when Susan steps up and says goodbye to Mike, she says softly to him, I love you once, I love you twice, I love you more than beans and rice. The women all rally around Susan, and the neighborhood has burgers to celebrate Mike. At first, Renee feels guilty and she doesn't want to go to the funeral because she feels like Mike's death is her fault, but Bree convinces her that she should go in order to honor Mike. Tom flies home for the funeral. He offers Lynette a ride to the church. Unfortunately, this upsets Jane, who doesn't understand why this couple has come together over the loss of a friend. So Lynette's big reflection leads her to realize that she wants to fight for Tom and fight to keep her marriage alive. The death of Mike has led Carlos to realize just how short life is, and he's uncomfortable with the fact that he has spent most of his life trying to, quote, help the rich get richer. So he decides he wants to quit his job and become a counselor instead. He wants to help addicts the way that the staff at rehab helped him. After some reflection, Gabby agrees that it's okay for him to quit his job and do something more meaningful. Bree's reflection is about, quote, the mask, which is something her mother taught her when she was a child. We have a brief flashback where we see one of her days of marriage with Rex Vandekamp. She tells him she is upset and humiliated by something that he's done, and he responds by saying, "I think you're stupid to feel those things," which is a polite smile so no one can tell what you're really feeling. Well, the cops find the body of Alejandro at the construction site and bring Bree in for questioning once again. We see her using this mask as she answers questions for the cops. They use the mug she touches at the station to get her DNA because they want to build a stronger case before they arrest her. Apparently, her DNA or fingerprints are on Alejandro's body. First of all, I don't think Bree carried the body by herself. Second of all, why are Mike and Carlos's prints not on the body? And they would be easily identified because both of them have criminal records. I don't know. The thing that is very clear is that these cops have it out for Bree because they are very loyal to Chuck, who wanted to do anything he could to lock Bree up and punish her. So his buddies are doing the same thing. So maybe that's why they never even looked further for fingerprints and had a bias as they looked for evidence. That's one possibility. Season 8, episode 18. Gabby has decided that she needs to get a job to support the family a little better because Carlos's new gig is just not gonna support them. After a terrible job search where everyone tells her she has no skills, Gabby ends up getting a job as a shopper's assistant at a popular department store, which is the perfect job for her, and it's clear right away she is very good at this. So I'm very happy for Gabby. We have a little bit of a conclusion with the other Vandekamp child. Remember, we had a Danielle story a few episodes ago. Now Andrew has come to town with his fiance, who is a woman named Mary Beth. And Bree's like, "Andrew, you're gay." And Mary Beth also knows Andrew's gay, but she doesn't care because she just wants to be married and have someone who loves her. And Bree puts together that Andrew is marrying this woman for her money. So Bree is like, "Andrew, don't do that. That's not fair to her or to you. Even if she knows that's why you're doing it, like, it's not the right thing, and you deserve to be happy." Andrew just needs some time to get back on his feet, so Bree lets him move in for a while to help support him while he figures things out. Bree is finally completely beating the bad mother allegations. Later that night, Bree talks to Ben on the phone and thanks him for keeping her secret about the body so far, since, of course, he has been questioned about the body at the construction site. Unfortunately, the cops have tapped her line and overhear this, so now they have reason to arrest her. Over to the Scavos, Lynette begins her plans to get Tom back. So with a little help from Penny, she gets rid of Jane for the night so that she can call Tom and have him come over. She plans to tell him there's a power outage so that it's all romantic and there's candles and like, oh, she's helpless and needs him. It seems like it's going very well and headed in the right direction, but then Tom hurts himself on something and Lynette's like, "Oh my God, let me look at that." And she goes and flips on the light. And so Tom realizes the whole thing was just like a setup. And Tom is mostly upset that she would trick him like this right after Jane has moved in with him. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. Jane moved in with Tom. But then Tom goes home that night and Jane makes a move on him and asks him if he wants to have sex, and he does not. Trouble in paradise? Renee and Ben are engaged for realsies this time. I actually really like them as a couple. Even though he did the whole thing with the money scam before, I like them. He has good intentions now. He's a cool guy. And finally, MJ is struggling with his behavior following his father's death. Julie kind of tries to step up and start parenting him, which upsets everyone in the house. So then Susan steps the fuck up and starts to explore some healthy ways for MJ to express his anger. People all sent them like jams and food and such, and Susan throws one at the wall and breaks it and lets MJ do the same. And she explains that people sent them to help them feel better, and if this is what they need to do to feel better, then that's okay. Actually, a Susan dub. I'll say it. I'll say it. Season 8, episode 19. Gabby is struggling to build clientele at the store, and she starts to think maybe this job just isn't going to work out because she's not making enough money. She decides that she might be more successful if she moves over to the men's department. So she does so, and she starts flirting a little bit so that she can build up her clientele. She even goes so far as to remove her wedding ring when she goes to work so that the men won't know she's married. Gabby takes Carlos out for dinner. It's on her this time because she's the girl boss. She's the one with money. We kind of love it. And one of her clients recognizes her and comes over to talk to her. So she has to tell him that Carlos is her brother, and she invites the man to join them. So it seems Carlos may be struggling with the fact that Gabby is the one making the money now, but he's specifically upset with the tactics she is using in order to get these clients. However, Gabby points out that there have been many times where he has brought her along to events and expected her to flirt with his clients in order to land deals. But now that she's the one doing it on her own, it's the problem. What gives? Bree is arrested during Renee's bridal shower. She's bailed out by Bob, but he isn't a criminal defense lawyer. So he suggests this lawyer named Tripp, who is super hardcore and has won all kinds of crazy cases before. There is still hope for Bree because the cops are unable to use the evidence from Orson because they can't follow up on it since Orson is no longer around. But it's not clear if Orson is dead or if he's just like in hiding, moved away. I have no fucking idea. So that's why I decided not to put a grave on Orson, but he might be dead. We'll discuss a little more with the final episode, I think. Also, the call that the police tapped could be explained away as something other than murder. So she might be okay. But she's still in danger, and Carlos really doesn't want Bree taking the fall for what he did. So all the girls want to help pay for Bree's lawyer, but of course this is a problem for Carlos because he just quit his high-paying job and can't really help, even though, again, he feels bad that she's taking the fall for what he did. When Bree finally meets Tripp, she brings him like a muffin basket and introduces herself and her case, and he has no interest because her case just isn't that exciting. But then when he is at the police station, he sees that she is being questioned, she's really stressed, and there's something obviously that she knows and she's hiding. So he becomes interested, and when the cop starts asking her questions that are like pushing the boundaries of what's legal, Tripp comes in and puts an end to questioning and introduces himself as her lawyer. Here is Tripp, BT dubs. Part of this questioning comes when cops doctor evidence found in Alejandro's hotel room. He had a map of Wisteria Lane and had certain houses marked. I think it was Gabby's in particular. So they just add like another thing so it looks like he was also there for Bree. It's really fucked up. For the Scavos, Tom keeps putting off delivering the divorce papers to Lynette for her to sign. He keeps saying he'll do it, he's just busy, he'll do it, he'll get around to it. But Jane gets sick of that, so she delivers the divorce papers herself in a stack of the kids' textbooks that they left when they were studying at Tom's. She also tells Lynette that Tom already signed them, and Lynette ends up confronting Tom at the bar. She signs the papers, walks away, sits in her car, and sobs. Tom is pissed that Jane brought the papers to Lynette because that is absolutely none of her business. When Jane tells Tom that he needs to stop thinking about Lynette's needs and start thinking about her own, he says that he's always going to care about Lynette. And finally, for Susan, there's this whole thing this episode that Mike has a secret sister he never knew about until a couple years ago, and then he respected the secret for his mother because his mother was ashamed of this daughter who is autistic. It seems from these letters they sent back and forth that there was this guilt for getting rid of an inconvenient child that Susan brings up, and she's like, I can't believe someone would do that just because it's inconvenient. And so Julie is like, okay, Mom, I'll keep the baby. And Susan's like, no, that's not what I meant. And Julie says, no, you're right. It is selfish just for me to give it up for adoption because I want a PhD. Oh my God. So she decides officially she's going to keep the baby. Okay, girl. Season 8, episode 20. Bree and Trip have lunch together. Turns out he's a liberal, which is a little new for Bree. She's a little nervous about that. There are going to be a bunch of witnesses for Bree's trial, which is moving along very quickly. Ben is one of those witnesses, and they will also be calling a list of men that Bree has slept with. So Trip asks her to tell him about these sexual encounters because anything in there at all that could be used against her in some way, he needs to know about it. It's most likely that the prosecution is going to make a case that Bree might have slept with Alejandro and not remembered it. So therefore, if they can bring forward a list of men who have slept with Bree and she doesn't remember any of them, that could support that theory. I don't know if that's supposed to mean like she doesn't remember killing him as well, or if they're just trying to establish motive, because I think the motive is definitely missing from this case right now. Trip tells Bree that he's not gonna like judge her for all of this. She will be humiliated on the stand, and he wants to have this discussion, just the two of them first, so that she will be prepared. And he even starts and confesses that he lost his virginity when he was 24. And the two of them share a laugh, and Bree feels more comfortable. And so she tells him about the weeks of her life where she was sleeping with a lot of men she didn't know. This conversation and Trip's patience and understanding and kindness sort of makes Bree think maybe she has a crush on him. For the Scavos, Penny tells Lynette Tom has not, in fact, signed the divorce papers yet. Lynette goes out on a date with Tom's boss, and they end up talking about Tom. He made things a pain in the ass for Tom just because. And if, at first, Lynette is like, that's funny. Fuck that guy. And then he says he plans to send Tom to India for a year for work. And Lynette is like, let's not do that. So the kind of 180 Lynette takes about how she feels about Tom really confuses the guy, and he thinks that she's crazy now. Moving right along to Renee, she suggests that Ben marry her so that they will have spousal privilege. So essentially the idea is that if they get married, then hopefully Renee will not have to be made to testify against him in court. So they decide that the wedding will need to be as soon as possible. And finally, for Susan, MJ is a part of a go-kart race at school. It is meant for fathers and sons, but Susan is helping MJ build the cart. MJ doesn't really like what she comes up with, or at least he's having a really hard time expressing how he really feels about this whole thing. So he pushes his go-kart down the driveway and then gets hit and crushed by a garbage truck. And he's like, oh no. It turns out he just doesn't want to be the weird one and like the one with the dead dad. So all the men in the neighborhood come and help MJ build his car, and Susan just lets them have their guy time. Season 8, episode 21. Trip has a hot young girlfriend. Turns out it's not his girlfriend, it's a PI he hired to help find other evidence on the case that might work in Bree's favor. So she's going to be working on that while the trial begins. Lynette and Susan are beginning to wonder if they should go to the judge and confess to what actually happened in order to protect Bree. And the night before the trial begins, Trip stops by Bree's with donuts and a copy of Casablanca that they can just hang out and watch together, so that no matter what happens the next day, at least they got to have a nice, relaxing night. And then the trial begins. Lynette, Susan, and Gabby all testify on Bree's behalf, but then the prosecution brings forward Bree's suicide note, which was recovered from the hotel. They use it to suggest that she does not actually have a clean conscience, despite what she says in her testimony. The intensity of this causes Gabby kind of for the first time to really feel the guilt of pinning all of this on Bree. And at the end of the day, the PI comes by with some evidence that might help Bree's case because it may put motive on someone else. And this evidence is the same thing essentially that Chuck found, which is that Ramon Sanchez is the stepfather of Gabby Solis. Bree and Tripp discuss this, and he wants to use it, of course, because his job is to defend Bree. She explains that although the information would exonerate her, she does not want to betray her friends. Tom tells the kids he is going to India for a whole year for work, and he tells Lynette that he's going to miss her. It's really going to be hard because they've never been away from each other like this before. Later, his boss Greg makes a comment about how he doesn't understand how Tom could put up with Lynette for so long because she is, quote, psycho. Tom gets super defensive of her, and then when he calls Lynette a bitch, Tom punches him, and of course, Tom gets fired. Jane is confused about why Tom is so upset about this one insult at Lynette and why it would cost him his job. And he explains that he is still in love with Lynette, which means Tom and Jane break up. Later, Lynette is trying on her bridesmaid's dress for Renee's wedding. Lee is over to help her, and when Tom goes over to Lynette to see her and talk to her, he stands outside, he sees through the window that there's a man unzipping Lynette's dress, and so he assumes that Lynette has moved on, but it's literally just her gay bestie. And finally, Julie is concerned that Porter might not be holding up his end of the agreement in terms of helping with the baby. I think a lot of this comes from the fact he's hard to get a hold of and he's not able to show up at the doctor's appointments and stuff with Julie. But Susan goes to visit him at work, and it turns out Porter's just working 3 jobs and doing literally everything he can in order to support Julie and this baby. Susan is able to see that there are other kinds of support that Julie does need with the baby. So she tells Julie that she's going to sell her house and move close to Julie while she finishes her PhD. Season 8, episode 22. I'm sorry that this is going so fast, but can you feel the energy? I don't know. This is it. Bree's trial is a huge sensation. She looks so cunty as she walks to the courthouse each day with her sunglasses and paparazzi. It's a big deal. Ben is refusing to give any helpful information, so he is held in contempt of court and arrested, and Renee begs Bree to let Ben out of his promise in order to protect him. Meanwhile, Carlos is really starting to feel like he wants to step up and take the blame so that Bree can be let off for all of this. When Renee talks to Ben about things again, she puts together that the night of the progressive dinner party might have actually been the night of the murder, which means she might have seen something after all. A prosecutor tries to get Renee to testify, and Renee at first has no interest. Then the prosecutor threatens to call immigration, which would get Ben deported, so Renee is forced to go on the stand and testify. On the stand, Renee says that she saw Bree arrive home around 3 a.m. the night after the dinner party. She was covered in dirt and leaves, and she was carrying a shovel. This testimony means that the jury is likely going to find Bree guilty. And Tripp is honest with Bree and tells her she is going to lose unless she tells Tripp the entire truth. It also comes out here that Tripp has caught feelings for Bree. They kiss. Tripp asks Bree to tell him everything, and so she does. The next day, Tripp calls Gabby to the stand, which pisses Bree off because he promised he would protect Gabby as well. He gets Gabby onto the stand and gets her to admit that Alejandro was her stepfather. And then in order to just stop things for the day, Bree pretends to faint. And so they're given a recess. And they'll return the next day. We will pause there with the trial. Let's move on to some of these other characters. Karen McCluskey is dying. She is going into hospice care, but the girls tell Karen they'll help take care of her so that Roy doesn't have to take care of her alone and she can spend her last days at home. One of Karen's requests is a copy of a specific record that she would like to listen to as she's dying, but Bree isn't able to find it for her. However, Tripp is able to track it down, and he brings it for Karen. Carlos and Gabby are at Mrs. McCluskey's helping keep an eye on her, and they step out of the room because they start having a little argument. They realize they're kind of at a turning point in this case, and they either have to come clean or not, and Carlos will not let Bree take the fall for this, and so he tells her that the next day at court, he is going to confess. The next day, Gabby plants a knife in Carlos's jacket so that he'll be stopped by security because, of course, she doesn't want her family to fall apart. She's just hoping they'll find something else to exonerate Bree. Well, Mrs. McCluskey shows up and asks Tripp to put her on the stand. And once she is sworn in, Karen confesses to the murder of Alejandro. Charges against Bree are dropped, and because she only has a few days left to live, there will be no charges brought against Mrs. McCluskey. So everything works out for Bree in this case. However, Tripp broke his promise and was about to throw Gabby under the bus. So Bree tells him he is not welcome near her anymore, and she has seemingly lost interest. Roy and Tom talk. He tells Tom that he told McCluskey that she was the love of his life and that it is so important to say these things while we still can. Speaking of the Scavos, Penny calls Lynette with the great news that Tom and Jane broke up. Tom stops by around 8 that night to drop off the divorce papers. This scene happens outside on the street. He tells Lynette how much he loves her, and even though she has moved on, he says, "You, Lynette, will always be the love of my life." And Lynette is like, "What do you mean I've moved on?" And he says that Greg told him there was somebody else, and that's why Lynette lost interest. And she walks towards Tom and says, you, 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 and they kiss. And everything is gonna be okay, maybe. I tell you, I'm not always a rom-com girly, I'm not gonna lie to you, but I was fucking sobbing. And lastly, Susan's house is put up on the market because she is going to move to be near Julie. So she has to tell the girls that she will soon be moving from Wisteria Lane. Season 8, episode 23, the finale of Desperate Housewives. We start with Mary Alice moving on to the lane. Her voiceover tells us, quote, "And this was the beginning of the end." And then we get this epic montage of all the crazy shit that has happened through these 8 seasons. And I just wrote in my notes, I'm gonna throw up. Let's start with Gabby. She gets a big promotion and becomes the vice president of sales at the department store. But she's working a lot now and bringing in the big bucks. And Carlos is sad about that and misses her. And so he hires a young woman to be a gardener, just like Gabby had John in season 1, in order to kind of make her jealous. At Renee's wedding, which is kind of the big event that brings everyone together in this episode, Carlos and Gabby are dancing, and they reflect on how their roles have changed since their early marriage. Gabby tries to compare them to other couples, but Carlos says that while other couples are doing a waltz, they are doing a tango. So Gabby and Carlos are content in their marriage. Things are going to be messy, but they will figure things out, and they don't need to compare themselves to anyone else because this is their journey and their journey alone. Catherine is back for the finale. She and Robin apparently broke up shortly after they arrived in Paris. And also, Catherine, I guess, is just no longer into women. And like, that line was just so unnecessary. I don't even feel like they needed to mention anything other than the fact she moved to Paris. But whatever. Anyways, she founded this like really successful frozen aisle pastry company in France, and it's become a really big hit, and so she wants to expand to the United States. So Catherine offers Lynette the job as the head of the United States division of the company. This would mean Lynette would have to move to New York for work, and she has literally just patched things up with Tom. So Lynette is like, I don't think so. But then Lynette goes to the grocery store and she runs into the same woman who she saw in the pilot, who kind of looked down on Lynette for having kids and who Lynette wanted to say she was having a terrible time, but couldn't. And yeah, she asks Lynette how her life is, and Lynette says that, oh, I actually just got a big job offer and I might move to New York. As soon as the woman walks away, Lynette calls Catherine and tells her they should talk. When Tom finds out that Lynette is seriously considering taking the job, he explains to her that he's worried that she will never be happy. Even if she takes this job, Lynette is likely to find something is still missing from her life. During her maid of honor speech, Lynette talks about how you should never forget the thing in your life that is constant and stable and there to support you. Meaning the only thing she really needs to be happy is Tom. And this is when Tom tells her he thinks he could be happy in New York. So truly, I think maybe Tom was the one who needed to realize this, because how many times has Tom given her shit for like doing anything with her career, for making any of the decisions and calling the shots? And so does he realize this? Maybe. At least he tells her he might be happy. And I guess the separation worked out for them. Over to Bree. Tripp shows up to tell her he wants her, and Bree can't understand how anyone, especially someone as great as Tripp, would want her, even though they know how flawed she is. But when they're together at the wedding, it becomes clear that she's willing to explore that and see if the relationship could work. Julie goes into labor, and this leads to a big climax of several events at once. There is Julie in labor and delivering her baby at the hospital, Mrs. McCluskey on her deathbed, and people at the wedding dancing. All of it is underscored by the song Wonderful, Wonderful, which is what Mrs. McCluskey's record is playing. Near the end of the sequence, Bree gets the call that Mrs. McCluskey passed away. She hurries to her home to say goodbye and breaks down. This sequence is really hard to put into words if you haven't seen it, but it's like 8 seasons of catharsis. Because it is this montage of several scenes, it contrasts so nicely to the really fast montage at the start of the episode. And so you really have just all this time to just feel things that have been brewing, maybe all season, but at least all episode. Julie has a healthy baby girl, and she ends up asking Susan in the hospital if she thinks she'll ever remarry. Susan says maybe, but for now she is happy with her memories that she made with Mike. And finally, we have a poker game. It is the last game that Susan will have with the girls, because she is ready to leave Wisteria Lane. They all agree that it will not be the last time they all play poker together. And then Mary Alice's voiceover comes in with, "It was a promise made in all sincerity, but sadly, it was not meant to be." Oh no, I'm gonna cry. We then get little glimpses of what happened with each of the women's lives after they leave Wisteria Lane. So Lynette and Tom leave the lane 4 weeks later. She becomes a CEO in New York. They have an apartment overlooking Central Park, and she will play there with her 6 grandkids in the years to come. Love that ending for her, but we'll keep going and then we'll discuss. Carlos and Gabby leave the following year after Carlos helps her develop a personal shopping website, which leads to a show on the Home Shopping Network. They buy a mansion in California where they argued happily ever after. 2 years after that, Bree and her new husband, Tripp, leave Fairview. They move to Kentucky, where Bree joins a club for conservative women, and Tripp encourages her to get into politics. She's elected to the state legislature. Okay, I said I was going to go through all of them, but what the fuck? I'm sorry, but out of all of their endings, this one's just, I hate it. Anyways, Susan, however, is the first to move. So the voiceovers and like flash forward sequence ends there. We see Susan leaving her home for the last time. She introduces herself to the woman, saying she's going to love it here, and then gets in her car and takes one last drive around Wisteria Lane to say goodbye. And as she drives around, she feels that she is not alone. She drives, and these actors all dressed in white, characters who are deceased from the show, stand and watch and loom over the place. It's all characters who have passed away. So like George is there, you know. Of course, Mary Alice is among them. And I tried to use this sequence to decide if Orson is dead or not. Also, not all of them are there because they couldn't get all the actors there. I'm not really sure. Anyways, Susan drives away, and then we see the woman who's just moved in take a box inside and put it in a cabinet and then lock it, implying, like so many women and neighbors that have come before her, this woman has dark secrets too. And that is where we end with Desperate Housewives. I almost don't even know what to say right now. I hate the ending for Brie. I don't understand why they didn't give her the job with Catherine. They needed something for Lynette that was like business focused. I get it, but I feel like there are a lot of different routes they could have taken. Tom and Lynette, presumably being happy, having grandkids, cute. Love it. Carlos and Gabby, their little flash forward ending is kind of unserious, but like they're living their best life in a mansion. I think they're like sitting in a hot tub at the end. So as long as they're happy, right? And then the fucking Brie thing. Do people like this ending? Because I feel like she has come so far. I'm not saying she's not conservative anymore or whatever. I guess her making her own voice in politics makes sense, but ultimately she like actually wasn't very engaged in politics. She just had strong opinions about certain things when they needed comedy. So I don't know about this one. Like I said, I wish Brie had ended up working with Catherine instead, because that would just tie in so well to all of seasons 4 and 5. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the wrong. I'm willing to be in the wrong sometimes. It's harder for me to start discussions because there is no more story, so I can't foreshadow things. Some people take the very last beat of the episode where the woman has dark secrets to mean that, like, Wisteria Lane is particularly cursed in some way, or I personally do not agree with that and instead prefer to think that it represents no matter where we are in life or what journey we are on or how simple our lives may seem, everyone has shit going on. I think that is more representative of the original premise of the show than something like, well, Wisteria Lane is just cursed. But if you're someone who likes that theory, like, that's all good. It's fun. Totally get it. I need a grave for Karen. In a lot of ways, I think this season really speaks for itself, or is just a continuation of the things I discussed and explored with season 7. I mean, it's a complete story. They wrapped things up, and I think they did it really well. But I'm very interested, of course, in hearing what you think. Who's your favorite character? What's your favorite season? What arcs stand out as the best and worst in the series as a whole? Which character do you think had the most growth throughout the series and why? How do you feel about Susan? On that note, I will say once again, Susan in seasons 6, 7, 8 is so much better than early Susan for me. Maybe her plots just get more interesting once it's no longer just concerned with who's she going to end up with. Although I said it is a complete story, there has been discussion about a reboot in recent years. There is no confirmation whatsoever that there is a studio or network involved in picking up such a thing, but people in pop culture in general have discussed it. So I'm thinking about making a video maybe where I like pitch some ideas for the reboot, because I do have some that I think could be fun just to share. I'm also planning on making a video that will kind of conclude this series where I rank the seasons. So hopefully that will be fun. And last but not least, a video where I play the Desperate Housewives video game. So I do have some more Desperate Housewives content coming, but I'm also going to be venturing into other shows. So I hope you'll stick around for those. But if you're just here for the Desperate Housewives series, I get it. And I hope that you enjoyed this deep dive of this series as much as I did. I think when I do my series ranking, I will be able to like decompress a little more about what a journey this has been. This series has been a lot of fun for me to create and pushed me in ways I didn't expect. It's also allowed me to launch this channel, which is something I've thought about doing for a really long time. So thank you so much for coming along on this journey with me. If you enjoyed this series, consider sharing it with a friend who likes these kind of long, deep dive TV videos. It would mean a lot and really help support the channel. Don't forget to subscribe down below so you don't miss what's coming next, and I will see you later. Bye!